Both the Communist and the Central Kerbin Alliance network continue to pour more resources and equipment into the Southeast Kerbin conflict. Due to the difficulties in the terrain, the Alliance has remained heavily reliant on its fleet of utility helicopters. While initially intended for transportation, many of these helicopters have been retrofitted with weapons. As the militaries and budgets for both sides grow, there's little sign of the conflict coming to an end anytime soon. This is Echo 3, and let's continue discussing the Cold War. The reliance on the utility helicopters has once again renewed Central Kerbin Alliance network interest in developing a dedicated attack helicopter. That is why the Alliance has begun developing the new Kobra attack helicopter. It should be ready for field deployment very soon. Along with helicopters, the Alliance has been funding a host of new projects. And not just military projects either, as the Alliance has the stated goal of reaching Duna sometime in the next few years. This has resulted in the Space Center seeing an explosion in funding. While Kraken drives remain theoretically possible, nuclear propulsion looks to be the way to go in the short term. Top secret Project Eeloo has resulted in 2 new types of engines. The first is a nuclear thermal rocket engine. Scientists have called it the Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle, or NERV for short. The second is a nuclear-powered ramjet engine. There'd be too much radiation to have crew on board the vehicle, but it shows lots of promise for powering a supersonic low-altitude cruise missile, or SLAM for short. This missile has some advantages over the conventional ballistic missiles that are currently in use. This is capable of carrying a pretty substantial payload, as well as remaining low enough to avoid any kind of radar detection. However, while being able to travel at nearly Mach 3, the missile still wouldn't be able to reach its target as quickly as a ballistic missile. And while launching ballistic missiles is a simpler and more straightforward approach, this missile has the advantage of being able to remain in flight for many years at a time. This prototype is being launched from a very high platform. First, the engines are brought fully up to throttle, and then the missile is released. In application, it is more likely that this missile will be air-launched. Now it's over the water, and it screams past Mach 1. The missile continues to accelerate. It is now traveling faster than 700 meters per second. Traveling just above the waves, it is doubtful that any communist radar would detect this missile coming. While this test vehicle is only armed with conventional explosives, if the Central Kerbin Alliance network decides to field this missile, it would be fitted with nuclear warheads. This powerful new missile certainly gives the Central Kerbin Alliance network a new edge in first strike capabilities, thus providing CKAN leadership with more possibilities and dilemmas. The nuclear engine for rocket vehicles was initially thought to be used for the upper stage of ballistic missiles. However, it has shown a lot of promise for other applications as well. It is an extremely efficient vacuum engine, making it perfect for traveling to the other planets. For now, the Space Center is going to be taking this engine on a test flight into orbit. And while in orbit, the craft will rendezvous with the 2 CKAN space stations. It's time to bring the scientist Cassidy Kerman home from the first space station, and the second craft needs an antenna attached to it, because apparently T.U.R.D forgot it during the construction phase. The efficiency of the NERV engine is incredible. As is, this craft has enough Delta-V to go from low Kerbin orbit to Duna and back. Depending on how this test flight goes, perhaps only a few modifications will be needed to send this craft to Duna. And potentially more than just go there, but land and return from the surface of the planet. While the Communists had shown lots of interest in the Mun, they, ironically, have not shown much interest in the Red Planet. At least, as far as what the National Security Intelligence Service is saying, they haven't shown much interest in the planet. The crew is ready, the craft is fully assembled. It is time to add the launching clamps, send this craft out to the launch pad, and send it up into space. The large wings on the Pathfinder shuttle are useful for re-entry and landing. However, they make ascent difficult. The pilot must not deviate much from prograde, otherwise the craft will become unstable, which did not seem to be much of a problem on this launch. While the Nerve engine is a very efficient engine, it doesn't have a very high thrust-to-weight ratio, so the booster stage needs to do most of the work of getting the craft into orbit. Otherwise, the low thrust may mean the craft will not have sufficient time to finish circularizing its orbit. After a few orbits, Jebediah has now rendezvoused with the orbit lab and is attempting to dock. The red marker on the nav ball is from the mod Docking Port Alignment Indicator, and it does make docking a little easier. Jebediah successfully connects the two crafts, and Cassidy Kerman transfers over. The next part of the mission is they rendezvous with the other space station. Due to a small oversight and the lack of an antenna, this station has been left in orbit, full of science that it cannot transmit. This lab contains lots of information from CKAN's first trip to another planet. The scientific information that this lab contains will be very valuable as CKAN plans its next interplanetary mission, this time to Duna. Again, Jebediah carefully plots his rendezvous, and after a few orbits, the crafts meet up. The first thing is for Bill to install an antenna over on the station, doing what Todd should have done in the assembly building. With the antenna attached, Bill's work is done, and he heads back to the shuttle. Next, a scientist will be transferred over. The scientist will finish processing all the data left in the lab and then transmit it back to Kerbin. At a future date, another craft will probably be sent up to return this Kerbal back to the surface. With the missions completed, Jebediah plots his return back to the Space Center. The red line and the X are from the mod trajectories. After all of that orbital maneuvering, the craft still has over 1,000 meters per second of delta V left. That does mean that there's quite a bit of liquid fuel left in the craft, so Jebediah will be firing the engine some during the descent in order to use up that fuel and lighten the craft for the landing. The mod on the left is the AtmosphereAutopilot mod. It is being used to help hold a particular angle of attack during the descent. The pretty plasma effects behind the ship are from the mod Re-entry Particle Effects Renewed. Jebediah carefully monitors his speed and descent rate in order to make sure he will land at the runway. As the shuttle flies over the home mountain range, Jebediah continues to fire the engine to burn off the last bit of fuel. The runway is now about 50 kilometers away. The craft still has plenty of speed. The shuttle is still supersonic at 25 kilometers out. Now at 15 kilometers out, the craft drops below supersonic. Jebediah carefully lines up the shuttle with the runway and deploys the landing gear. Jebediah carefully eases the craft down on the runway, and another successful landing by Jebediah Kerbin. Opposing forces in southeast Kerbin have been using illicit drug trade in order to fund their operations. The National Security Intelligence Service has once again asked the Space Center for help deploying an agent in order to stop this operation. D.D. Kerbin will be flying the newly developed Kobra attack helicopter. Hopefully, the agent will be competent enough to manage the weapons. On a side note, I really did fly this mission with two people. While I flew the helicopter with the joystick, another person used the keyboard and mouse in order to operate the weapons. Just another reason to look forward to multiplayer in KSP2. There are a couple scout cars guarding the landing zone. They will need to be dealt with before the agent can be dropped off. The agent is able to lock onto the first one and take it out with a 20mm cannon. But there's still one more to deal with. As DD flies towards the second scout car, the agent is struggling to line up the weapon systems. It's understandable that the agent would struggle with the new systems on this attack helicopter. However, those aren't spitwad shooters on that scout car, which is precisely why CKAN developed this narrow profile and agile helicopter. The scout car fires a spandrel at the helicopter, but DD's able to dodge. The agent returns fire with the cannon. However, he's struggling to hit the car as it moves down the mountainside. Warning alarms sound in the helicopter as the scout car is able to maintain its lock. The agent switches weapons control over to DD, and DD fires rockets at the scout car. DD is able to score a hit with his salvo. DD can now safely deploy the agent. The conflict in southeast Kerbin continues to intensify, and Duna is now on the horizon. I am Echo 3, and thanks for joining me on this discussion about the Cold War. I will see you next time.